we have a very special guest, Nick White, COO of Celestia, who will be doing a fireside chat moderated by our new VP of Ecosystems, Phil Kelly. They'll be talking about how Celestia and RISC Zero have been collaborating from bridging to DA to provable apps and beyond. Welcome, Nick.
Woo! Hey guys, I'm Nick. I work at Celestia Labs, and we're building Celestia, which you can think of as a layer one chain that is built specifically for a roll-up centric future where applications don't run on-chain, they run off-chain, and Celestia acts as this very simple, very scalable and decentralized base layer where data is published and ordered. So we work a lot with ZK teams like RISC Zero, building these kinds of provable applications, and like trust minimization and verifiability are a big part of what Celestia is designed for.
Yeah, and you know, I realized at some stage that you guys were like just a really early product market fit for ZK, and a lot of people didn't even realize you were using ZK. But yeah, data availability and using proving systems to prove and verify the availability is like, you know, something people don't even talk about because it works so well and is so widely used already. You guys are working with us on Blockstream Zero, which is great. You know, we're looking forward to having some of our first integrations on that. But the new world we're all moving into is provable apps. So really, and I think you're doing a lot more on ZK, so we're going to come on to that later, but you know, provable apps and the role of Celestia in that is a really interesting starting point. And maybe you can just like start off by just getting your views on the provable apps market and how it's evolving and where you see provable apps starting to, you know, come into fruition.
I think that provable apps is basically the selling point of blockchains. It's like why would you build your application on chain versus just, you know, in standard Web 2? And the answer is that you want to make it verifiable, aka provable, by as many people as possible. That's what that's what enforces the integrity of the application, and makes it so you don't have to trust Google or, you know, Facebook or whoever's running the application to be honest. You know, basically, like by default, that it's honest because you're verifying it directly on your phone or your computer. And so I think we're still a pretty far way away from building provable apps at scale, and obviously building provable app use cases that actually people care about and want to use. But I think we're on the cusp. I've never been more like bullish in my entire time in crypto than like right now, that we're on the cusp of making provable apps scalable and usable enough to finally build like these meaningful applications.
Yeah, and I think, you know, people are surprised sometimes. I mean, there are provable apps evolving already. We just saw Aragon, we saw Hashflow earlier. Any views on the market? I mean, there's different segments out there. There's DeFi, there's identity, there's games. Any thoughts on where we might start to see the first real breakout use cases?
Yeah, so some of the use cases that at least are like I think interesting are things like DeFi, clearly. Like if you think back to FTX, or every single time an exchange has like rugged its users, that could have been prevented by, if the exchange was running on chain, then, you know, and you wouldn't have to just trust SBF not to take your funds and do something with them. It would be provable and enforced on chain. So I think DeFi is a very like promising one, and I think, you know, we've already had a few provable exchanges, like DYDX was an original sort of like ZK roll-up exchange. I guess every DeFi app on Ethereum is relatively provable if you're running an Ethereum light node. But I think, again, one of the hurdles is like making it like, how verifiable are these things? Like, how much work do you have to do to attain that like actual trust minimization and provability? Because like applications on Solana are provable somewhat, but in reality, it's only the very sophisticated people running full nodes that can actually like verify and like prove to themselves that all these applications are like have integrity. Some of the other use cases that we saw up here are things like identity or like voting. I'm excited for not just proving the integrity of applications, but proving things about your identity on chain in a way that verifies privacy. And I think when we unlock like identity, that can open up a whole nother class of use cases, because we're really constrained on the kinds of applications we can build because of the fact that everyone is pseudonymous on chain. So you don't really have like a way of verifying things about users in the network. And I think that will do a lot to like you can solve Sybil resistance. You can target specific users. zk-TLS also another really interesting use case of provability, because then you can start to like vampire attack Web 2 applications, and the users can prove things about themselves to you or to the chain that allows like new ways of onboarding users. So that's going to be very interesting to see. I'll stop there.
I was going to say, I mean, also we were just talking earlier about the fact that arrogance is the first good use case of this, but I think sometimes people are not fully appreciating the kind of multi-chain capability of off-chain verifiable computation. So if you build a provable app, the code executes off-chain, and then you're just verifying it on a chain.
Yeah. You
can basically build it once and verify it on whichever chain you want, and so you've got instant multi-chain capabilities. I think just because some of the apps out there are still sort of in their early form, we're not seeing the multi-chain stuff as fully as we will at some stage, but it's definitely out there as like a really key benefit.
Yeah, and another really cool use case that has popped up recently in the Celestia ecosystem is an application called Prism, which basically you can think of as a provable app to prove the integrity of end-to-end encrypted protocols. So like, as it turns out, all the so-called end-to-end encrypted messaging, or like, whether it's messaging or not, any end-to-end encrypted kind of like channel has a backdoor, which is essentially the like key registry that is run by some authority. And unfortunately, that means the authority can basically do a man-in-the-middle attack. But we can, using Celestia and ZK proofs, build key transparency so that like you don't have to rely. You can have an end-to-end encrypted channel that no one can man-in-the-middle you. So that's another really exciting use case. That also like is something that you wouldn't typically think of as a blockchain application. In terms of interoperability, I think that's another huge change. Like, we were talking about like Ethereum and Solana and like how those chains are provable in a sense, or like verifiable, but because they're so heavy to prove, other chains can't verify what's happening on those chains directly. And so in order to have like really rich, robust, secure interoperability between chains, those chains need to become provable apps. So once everything becomes like provable and proven, then it can be aggregated and like sort of like tied in more closely with each other in a way that will like kind of reunify and defragment this like multi-chain ecosystem. And so
we've got a few use cases in common already. It's interesting to we obviously, which is why we value you guys so much as a partner. But I think we've got Hashflow. Who else have we got? We got Spice, I think. We got
Eclipse.
Yep.
SpiceNet, I guess, and Sovereign SDK as well.
And I think Eclipse is fraud-proof, I think.
Eclipse is not. I don't think they ZK prove the full execution. They just have a fraud proof, a proven fraud proof, which is like a fault proof.
Yeah, very cool. So we got the provable apps world, and we got the role of Celestia in that. I think you're doing a lot more with ZK. I think a lot more coming up. And I think I was also just saying off stage, I heard your ZK podcast, and I heard the statement that you're going to launch verifiability or verification contracts on Celestia. That's super interesting. I think that's a massive unlock. Can you tell us more about the future plans for using ZK?
So I think, you're referencing ZK accounts, which is a new feature that is proposed for the Celestia base layer. So just taking a step back and like thinking about the role of Celestia and the role of like ZK and why they're so complementary is that if you want to have a provable application, you need two things. Essentially, you need to be able to prove that whatever transactions or inputs go into the application are processed correctly, but you also then need to know what those, you need to agree and know what those inputs were in the first place. So I think of RISC Zero as like enabling the applications to be, the execution and the application of the transactions to be proven, and Celestia as the sort of like source of truth of what the inputs to all those applications are. But then, why are we adding ZK counts? And so what we believe, the way that blockchains should be built is the layer one only should do this input. It should be a timestamping and data availability server for the inputs to all these applications, but it should not actually directly execute the transactions. The transactions should be proven, and they can be, and then the execution could be verified on chain. But that's very different than executing the transactions directly on chain, like Ethereum or most L1s currently do. So ZK counts is a feature where it will enable ZK proofs to be verified on the Celestia base layer. So we want to have a very minimal L1, and adding this one, so there's no smart contracts on Celestia, but adding this one feature of verifying ZK proofs basically gives you everything you could do with smart contracts and a full execution environment and more, but without adding any overhead to the base layer. So it's kind of like, to me, the last piece that makes Celestia have like this functional escape velocity, where like after that, I don't think you need to add any more functionality to Celestia. So some of the cool use cases for ZK counts are things like you can run anything, you can bridge the TIA token trustlessly between the rollups. You can also help route other assets from other ecosystems through Celestia to the rollups and back. So like we can have a bridge, an IBC bridge to Solana or Ethereum through the base layer that then gives any application that launches on Celestia kind of access to those things, or USDC, or all these, the whole universe of assets. And it can act as a routing hub for the native assets in the Celestia rollup ecosystem. And those rollups can start to verify each other's state and have a canonical bridge without having to, they can just connect into one place as sort of like so I think it could help simplify the developer experience when trying to build a new application and plug into all the other apps and chains that already exist.
So is that focused mostly on tokens and token bridging, or is it more generally, messaging interoperability, message passing and app interoperability?
Definitely the latter in the long term, but I think in the near term, asset bridging, like the main use of bridging right now is assets, essentially. I think in the future, as interoperability gets more secure and more complex, it can support just general, verifying any kind of message or event on another chain.
So if you're doing token bridging then directly between rollups, is there still interactivity on the mainnet of Ethereum? Like, does every interaction between two chains then result in something ultimately on Ethereum, or are you going to offload some of the token volume?
I didn't actually quite
Sorry.
get that.
All right. So if you're bridging tokens directly between two rollups, is there then a reduction in activity on Ethereum mainnet?
Well,
or does it ultimately then come back to equivalent settlement activity?
Well, yeah. When I'm referring to like assets being routed through Celestia to different rollups, I'm referring more to like the native ecosystem on Celestia, not necessarily the Ethereum. If there's an Ethereum settled L2 that uses Celestia for DA, then supposedly their canonical bridge would be on Ethereum. I think that Ethereum as a routing hub is challenging because of the slow finality. So that's something I think Celestia has single slot finality of like 12 seconds. So I think it kind of serves that purpose a little bit better, but for its native ecosystem, not necessarily not for the Ethereum ecosystem.
What are you looking at in terms of timing for the ZK accounts offering?
There's an active working group that is like developing a specification that's pretty far along. I think there are some folks that are working on a sort of end-to-end demo and like a V0 implementation. I think it's possible that it could go live in the first half of next year.
Very cool.
Because it's not really that complicated. The hard part is not the implementation so much as the design to make sure that it will, like the developer experience is good and it has all the right features to make it useful. So and also we're relatively conservative about a change that's this big, because it's like we want to get it right. We don't want to have to like go backwards. So we want to measure twice and cut once kind of attitude.
Yeah, and I guess you've got an ecosystem planning around it as well, so you want to give them time to potentially take on board the new capabilities. And yeah, very cool. All right, anything else we should be discussing, or should we go to audience questions?
Yeah, we can go to questions. Anyone have any questions? Don't be shy. Here we go.
Nice one.
We have a taker.
Just getting warmed up, first one.
You get 5 TIA. Just kidding.
Thank you. So you mentioned that you could bridge TIA to right now Eclipse through Hyperlane, I guess, right now. You're able to do that. But that is a wrapped version in some sense, because it is being locked on TIA Celestia and then being bridged to Eclipse. Somebody else also does, let's say Wormhole does that. So you'll have another wrapped version, right? How do you see this being solved in the future? Because this is what we've been repeating since the last few years, just issuing new wrap tokens on all new rollups and chains, right? What is the way to do it natively, when in future, even in rollups, you could have that native version of a particular asset and not have multiple versions of different bridges, right?
Yeah, this is a great question. So this is one of the things that we hope ZK accounts can help to solve. At the very least for TIA, the asset, right? So what Eclipse could have, the reason that we have to route TIA through, I think it goes to Stride and then through Hyperlane to Eclipse, is because Celestia can only have IBC-based bridges currently, because there's no smart contracts. So we can't actually bridge directly to Eclipse. And there's no way for Celestia to verify Eclipse's state in a secure way. So when there's ZK accounts, though, Eclipse being a ZK rollup or fault-proof rollup could deploy a ZK account-based bridge, and that could be the canonical bridge for TIA, the asset, in Eclipse. So you wouldn't have all this fragmentation. Then on top of that, potentially, if Eclipse could also use that ZK account-based bridge through Celestia as the canonical bridge for any other assets. I don't know if they would use that. I mean, they could use that even as a canonical bridge for like Solana-based assets if we have an IBC channel with Solana in the future. But in the very least, maybe for the Celestia native ecosystem assets. So hopefully, I think there's something to be said about like canonical bridges as a way to make sure that there's not like all this that you have canonical representation of assets rather than like 10 different versions of every asset based on the bridge that they use.
So ideally you could issue these tokens on multiple chains and rollups and have the ZK account on Celestia with all the calculations in terms of how many tokens issued on which chain and all of that. Is that what you're saying, some sense?
Yeah, so like you could, the asset could be issued on whichever rollup on Celestia. They could have a ZK account through which they could connect to any other rollup that has a ZK account, if that makes sense. So then you can have this like, if I deploy a new rollup, I just have to deploy a ZK account, and then I can actually connect with every other rollup that has a similar bridge. And so you can have a very secure sort of like bridging network that emerges from that. And hopefully if each rollup treats that as the canonical bridge, then you don't have asset fragmentation. That's the dream. I mean, but at the same time, like bridging is a free market, right? So people might just, and maybe there'll be something else that wins out, like different aggregation layers or protocols or things and maybe rollups just bridge directly between each other. But we think that this could be useful, so we're going to give it a try.
Thank you.
Another question. Nice.
Thank you.
Hey, I actually just wanted to ask, just out of curiosity. So, do you think stateless clients have a role to play? Maybe instead of using ZK, we can use something like a stateless client when, let's say, some EVMs have the ability to support that, or is the ecosystem currently more focused just on verification and not going the route of stateless clients?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of what a stateless client is a way that I can verify and I can be a validator and produce the next block without actually having the full state of the chain. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, like some part of the data rather than the whole part of the data.
Yeah, I think that so to me, stateless clients are a way to scale or make it easier for people to run, lighter to run a validating node on a given network, but it doesn't really, so that's kind of like an orthogonal problem to what we're trying to solve, which is we care more about end user verifiability, which is more about proving the correct execution and proving that the state is correct, not necessarily making it easier for someone to modify and add, execute the next block and modify the state. So it's not something that we're very focused on at the moment. I think it's very cool technology though, and could make it a lot easier for people to run validating nodes, which is important for censorship resistance and other things.
Cool, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I think we're good for today. Let's thank
Thank
Nick
you.
White and Phil Kelly, everyone.
If you guys want to talk, I'll be hanging out, so come hang out.